Welcome back to another episode, all. Throughout this episode, I'm going to be discussing the homosexuality compared to autism analogy, as I keep seeing people all over social media, especially anti-neurodiversity people, misrepresent the analogy. So let's get started. The analogy altogether is not about comparing autism to homosexuality themselves. It's not about comparing any kind of disability. Just allow me to read you out an example of what these kind of people misrepresenting it have to say. I quote, "Unfortunately, this is an imperfect analogy primarily because homosexuality is not a disability. While this analogy does illustrate that feelings of grief and loss do come, in large part from social constructs, it also implies that we can eliminate these feelings with little more than a change in attitude. This is not the case. My son is disabled. His challenges are numerous and varied, and no amount of attitude shift or even reasonable accommodation will make him a safe, independent child, at least as much as any other 6-year-old. This analogy also implies that no real loss occurs. Yes, a parent may see having a gay child as being a loss. There may have been a time, and sadly in parts of this country and the world, this is still true, when coming out as gay meant an end to career and social life. We are still fighting for basic rights like the right to get married, but these losses are social constructs. There is no reason, other than humanly created norms, for someone who is gay to be unable to marry, have a job, or carry on a safe, independent existence." End of quote. Now, that is entirely inaccurate to what the analogy is. This lady here, who wrote this article, clearly has not done anything about listening to Judy Sinner. She's just listened to misrepresentations of what's going on. And a part I would like to highlight here is, this analogy also implies that no real loss occurs. This is something that not just autistic people, but quite a lot of people in general have been pushing against. This attitude where a parent thinks that the child they have given birth to, they've lost the child. That attitude indicates, I wish my child did not exist. I love the way Jim Sinclair put it in his article in 1993, "Don't mourn for us." He claims, I quote, "When a parent or carer says, I wish my child did not have autism, what they are actually saying is, I wish the autistic child I have did not exist. I wish I had another, non-autistic child instead. This is what we hear when you mourn over our existence. This is what we hear when you pray for a cure, speak your fondest hopes and dreams for us. This is what we know, that your greatest wish is that one day we would cease to be, and strangers you can love will move in behind our faces." End of quote. That is entirely accurate, as that is precisely what this woman is stating, that autistic people should not exist, is what she's claiming here. But now, back to the analogy altogether. The analogy came around with the time of Judy Sinner, who's a sociologist. The fact that a sociologist should tell you that her claims have nothing to do with medical matters. They are not about disability. It's about sociology. So it's about social matters, what Judy Sinner is talking about. So I quote Judy Sinner now, the one who made the concept of neurodiversity, the one who came up with the word after biodiversity. I quote, "My idea was based on a recognition of the autistic self-advocacy movement was shaping up to be the last great identity politics movement to emerge from the modernist era. I hoped it would follow in the footsteps of the women's and gay lesbian movements. What all these movements had in common was that their members were misunderstood, devalued, and treated as second-class citizens, at worst vilified and abused. The women's and gay movements had changed the world, and now it was the turn of people on the autistic spectrum. It was clear that other groups of people with, as far as I knew then, ADHD and the DYIs were also in the same boat, and new coalitions were bound to emerge. The new movement, I imagined, would need a catchy name. My thesis was subtitled, A Personal Exploration of a New Social Movement based on Neurological Diversity. But the Neurological Diversity movement was too much a mouthful. That's when I had an aha moment. Why not a neurodiversity movement? End of quote. Where she mentions the autistic self-advocacy movement. That's one thing. The neurodiversity movement is separate. They are two separate movements. But I see a lot of people get confused and think that the autistic self-advocacy movement is the neurodiversity movement. As the woman in the article I read was comparing autism to homosexuality. But notice how I highlighted each time the term movement. Judy Sinner was talking about movements. She was not talking about disabilities. She was not talking about anything really. It was just social justice as a sociologist. So she's not saying that autism is no different to homosexuality. Notice of where she spoke about saying what these groups had in common is they were treated, mistreated, devalued, treated as second-class citizens. But that's what women. So if they're saying gay, why don't I ever find anyone say that Judy Sinner was saying that being autistic is identical to being a woman? Why doesn't anyone ever bring that up? Because the ones who like to bring up this excuse like to misrepresent the neurodiversity movement. They like to intentionally lie to you, the anti-neurodiversity crowd. Like the woman I quoted, she's talking about the loss of a child. I wish my son did not exist. I wish I had a different son. But they don't want to acknowledge that is what they are actually saying. Claiming that we shouldn't exist, that is genocide. That is eugenics. That is what the Nazi Holocaust were aiming to do. And they complain about being compared to a Nazi. They complain about being compared to an eugenicist when they want to do eugenics. The anti-neurodiversity crowd. So altogether, the homosexuality and autism analogy, it's not about what autism is, what homosexuality is. It's about how were these people treated by society. That's what it's about. It's all the parallels in the eugenics movement which caused the social injustices. The women. When I get further on my eugenics series, when I talk about the female inferiority doctrine, you'll be quite surprised that the scientists back then actually thought the human race did not need females. That females are not supposed to exist. That we should have evolved. That there should be no females among the human race. That was part of the eugenics movement, which led to a social injustice among women. homosexuals, the LGBTQ in the eugenics movement, but not supposed to exist among the human race, then treated as second-class citizens. Genocide attempted on them. Autistics, in the eugenics movement, the very same thing. Attempted to be eliminated, devalued, dehumanized, discriminated. Same with those with intellectual disability, those who are deaf, those who are blind, those with epilepsy. Every disabled person they attempted to eliminate, they devalued. They're the ones who came up with the R slur. They're the ones who came up with the terms imbecile, moron, fool, idiot, to make as medical terms, which are now all seen as insults. So were these men really kind men? What was going on? So Judy Sinner was not saying autism is no different to homosexuality. She was saying homosexual people, women, intellectually disabled people, where she said all the other DYIs, like ADHD. So all those with uncommon neurological variations were treated the same way as women and gay people. And she pointed out the women and gay movements made great improvements to our society, so why not do the same for disabled people to improve our society on equality? It's nothing to do with what the things actually are at all. So no one's saying in the neurodiversity movement that autism and homosexuality are the same thing. No one's saying that among the neurodiversity group, those who support it. And where she mentioned, my son is disabled. This is another thing. They keep acting like neurodiversity advocates are saying that autism's not a disability. Well, that's easily refuted. Why would we call it the neurodiversity movement? Why would we say it is a disability rights movement if we did not believe autism is a disability? Why would we say that? Why call it a disability rights movement if we're claiming it's not a disability? So clearly they are misrepresenting the analogy, misrepresenting neurodiversity advocates, but being intentional liars or perhaps unintentional at times. But clearly, along with Thomas Clements and others, Jill Escher, they love to misrepresent the neurodiversity movement. Ones like this woman who wishes her son did not exist at all. So that's what the analogy actually means. The analogy is just autistic people and all the other individuals with neurological variations that are not so common. Simply, they were treated in the same way homosexuals and women were treated. That's what the analogy is. Not the both or neither are disabilities. All it means is autistic people and other neurodivergent people were treated just as unfairly as women and gay people. That's all it means. So please, try and spread this message so that people stop misrepresenting what the analogy is. The analogy is all about how people were treated. It's not about what the things in hand being compared actually are. It's all about sociology, as Judy Sin's a sociologist, so it was all about social justice, not anything medical or anything like that. It's all political and sociological. So, please spread the message and help people come to an understanding of the analogy. Don't just keep letting people say that neurodiversity advocates think autism's not a disability, So they think that autism is just like homosexuality. Please, can you help stop these lies going around by people like Jill Escher, Thomas Clements, someone called Matt on his Twitter. Please help them stop spreading all these lies that they love to misrepresent neurodiversity. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. The next episode will be about the eugenics movement. It'll be the second part where I'll be doing about biological racism and showing of how all these social justice movements like the women's movement, the gay movement, the lesbian movement, of how all these political movements are the result of the social injustices which were caused by the eugenics movement. So since the neurodiversity movement is a reversal of the eugenics movement, those who are claiming we should not undo the eugenics are supporters of the racist, sexist, ableist eugenics movement. And they love to try and rationalise that they support such an idea that autistic people shouldn't exist. They try to rationalise it. So please, spread the word. Thank you.